Hi, I'm Mike, and this is NF Geeks. Well, I'm doing this video for two reasons. First is to sort of experiment with my brand new webcam. Just to sort of see how the video would come out and all that. I'm trying to expand NF Geeks a little bit. So I'm trying to raise the production value. Who knows, there might even be opening credits someday. And trying to spread out and get more contact with lots of other people. I figured this would be good to do Google Plus Hangouts, get a little bit of a clearer picture. And I kind of want to have a little more input, a little wider range of types and different sort of opinions from the types coming into NF Geeks, and try to, really expand out the whole thing. So, for example, some of you know this, some of you don't. There's an NF Geeks Facebook page, and I've been trying to go on the forums that exist on Facebook. Feel free to friend NF Geeks. Also, I signed on to Personality Cafe. I know you would have thought I would have done that already, but I did. And if there's something on there that you want me to look at and comment on, or there's you want to talk to me through that, or just anything, feel free to let me know, and I'll do that. So I'd be very interested in sort of expanding NF Geeks out that way. I'll probably go on some of the other forums too eventually, doing this slowly, baby steps. Okay, that's part one. So to do sort of a test of the webcam, I thought I'd give a topic. So we're going to go to everybody's favorite topic, the Scholarchy. Okay. But this is sort of an example of what I'm talking about with expanding NF Geeks. That's why I'm doing this, because there's been a ton of comments on all the videos. I think there's 3 now. And there's been really a lot of comments. A lot of people have said a lot to say, a lot of different ideas. And that has really been great. And this is why you want to have a dialogue with people. You want to have a discussion. You want to talk, okay? Not have this cockfight debate, okay, where you're trying to get them. It's certainly not troll. That's just stupid. Because if you have a discussion, and I mean a discussion, a dialogue, you can get new ideas, because in the dialogue, things will jog loose, come right out of the mind that you didn't think of before, because now you're in this sort of conversation with somebody. And that's what's happened. I got some new ideas based on some of the comments that have come in, and I want to share them with everybody. So that's the point of making this video, other than just the webcam. So there's really 3 parts to this video, 3. And the first part, and the most important part, I'm going to talk about economics within the Scholarchy, because there have been a lot of questions and comments about that, how economics plays into something like the Scholarchy. And so that jogged loose a bunch of ideas that I want to share that will either appease or make things worse, depending on, your opinions. But some of that came out, so I want to share that. Now, connected to that, and these 2 things are really connected, is I want to talk about how the economics, affects power differential within the Scholarchy, because a lot of people have had issues with that, of course, because it is hierarchical. Okay, so those 2 things go together, and I want to talk about that. And lastly, this is NF Geeks, so I want to bring it back to the Myers-Briggs. I want to kind of talk about how the temperaments and the types might fit into the Scholarchy, and what impact it would have on the temperaments, what impact the temperaments would have on the Scholarchy. Bring it back to MBTI. I haven't done that yet. Not in any way that I want to, really talk about. But certainly that'll, give birth to some comments. All right, so let's get into economics. Well, one of the funny things that have happened with the Scholarchy is that the issue of economics has come out. And what people have done is basically project the economic system that they hate onto the Scholarchy, and say that the Scholarchy would create or worsen that economic situation. Okay? Now, I originally designed the Scholarchy, or thought about it, to be independent of economics, so that any economic system could exist underneath it and produce it. That's why I didn't originally talk about economics. I just wanted it to come up under any condition. So a socialist condition, capitalism, libertarian, whatever. I wanted any economic system to be able to produce the Scholarchy. So I wanted it to be open-ended. Now, I take this as evidence of the open-endedness, is that whether you're on the left or the right, you projected that which you hate into the Scholarchy, which shows that there is an opening there for both types. So, for example, the libertarians and the capitalist people who leaned more towards the free market saw the Scholarchy as just socialism. Only, this is just socialism masquerading as, whatever. And people who were into socialism saw the Scholarchy as class conflict and just a validation of capitalism or the free market that doesn't change anything, because wealth would influence the way up and all that. So that is very interesting. But still, that conversation made me think of a few things that I want to add now that I think are important, and it does relate to the power differential between the different sort of intellectual classes that I'm trying to create here. So, the Scholarchy was based on my interpretation of the Republic by Plato. It's one of my favorite books, pieces of philosophy, and some people think he's an INFJ, by the way. I don't know. That's interesting because it is very idealistic. Aristotle and Socrates were certainly NTs, but maybe that's why it appeals to me. But regardless, the Republic is a hierarchy ruled by philosopher kings, if you don't know this, who are the wisest. So the wisest are sort of drafted into ruling the society. They may not want to, but out of a sense of duty and understanding of the good, and when Plato says good, he means the capital G good, ultimate good, they take on this position in the utopian society. Okay, and that's what I was trying to create in a more practical way, a sort of class of philosopher kings, if you will. Now, it occurred to me though in the Republic, and I'd kind of forgotten about this, that Plato indicates that the philosopher kings would live an ascetic lifestyle, sort of, that they would really kind of live like monks. They would have very minimal needs being met in terms of sleep, accommodations, or food, or whatever. They would not be living a very wealthy lifestyle filled with material rewards or any of that kind of thing. It would actually be the reverse. It would be a much more monastery ascetic basic needs lifestyle. And it occurred to me that that's maybe something I should think about, that perhaps as you go up in the Scholarchy, there might be some more restrictions or conditions regarding your economic status. That doesn't mean you have to live like a monk. I'm not suggesting that. But maybe there needs to be something balanced off, okay? And that the economic freedom should really be at the bottom of this, okay? So the people with high school diplomas and bachelor's degrees, they should have perhaps more economic freedom and economic choices than people moving up the hierarchy in the educational ranks, master's degrees, whatever. Okay. Now, when I say economic freedom, I want to make clear that this doesn't necessarily mean money. Okay. It could mean money, and it probably would mean money. But when I say economics, I'm talking about the way goods and services and materials are distributed in a society and how people access that. Okay, and what system allows for that access? How is this stuff distributed? That's when I talk about economics. Obviously, money's involved, but it doesn't have to be under the definition I just gave. So, so the economic freedom can be, more on the high school bachelor's level, than going up. Now, another thing to justify this, or to that sort of encapsulate it, and this is what I really started thinking about this, comes from something called the theory of justice and the two principles, and comes from John Rawls, okay, a philosopher about justice, and there's a whole theory about this, with the veil of ignorance and all that. We're not going to get into that, although I love that stuff, but just basically, he defines justice as fairness, okay? A fair system that's fair for all people, and across it is what you would consider a just society. And he says that, if somebody achieves a higher level of power or special privileged position, okay, there has to be some sort of counterbalance in the system regarding that to create that fairness, okay? Because he wants a society that is both equal, where the members can operate in equality and freedom, okay? So if we give someone some higher position of power or whatever, this is how he says it can be counterbalanced to keep that fairness. The first thing he would say is that anybody who achieves the position does so by merit, because they deserved it, they work hard for it, they have the ability to do it. It's not based on anything else, wealth or who you know or anything. Ideally, the Scholarchy would operate that way. But that's already implied. The second part, which is what I'm sort of getting at here economically, is that when there's some sort of differential between people, the greatest benefit goes to the least advantaged in the system. So the least advantaged people get the greatest benefit of this this move up by someone or a group of people. So, therefore, if we move people up due to degrees to more political power, we can, to balance that, as Rawls would say it, we give economic opportunities and freedom and the ability to get goods and services easier to the bottom half, to the bottom, or the people with high school diplomas, or whatever. Or the lower you are, the more economic freedom and ability to get goods and services and materials is. Okay. Now you could look at this from a libertarian all the way to a socialist point of view. From a libertarian point of view, you could make it so that the lower the degree, the less regulations you have, an individual has, and the more ownership they have over their property, and the less regulations they have to deal with regarding exchanges in business. Okay, right? Now, if you're socialist, you can view it as that goods and services are given to the entire class equally. So everybody at this class of high school, okay, that's on the lower end of the Scholarchy, gets to access, mass transit more than anybody else, or needs not to pay for transportation, or whatever socialist thing you want to throw in there, even education, okay, whatever it is. And so it could work both ways. Now, somebody might argue that if you have a high school diploma and under these systems, you could just become the wealthy and the 1% again. I would say no, honestly, because if you look at statistics on this, and Google this, feel free, that the lower your education, the lower your annual salary is and your ability to accrue wealth. Okay? Now, stop bringing up the outliers. Outliers, again, are examples that are way outside the normal distribution, way outside average, the average bell curve. So you have the curve, and outliers are examples that are way, way down, not in the curve and the average at all. And in statistics, these things aren't even counted because they're too anomalous. They're too singular examples to really, use as evidence of anything else. I say this because someone's going to say they know someone in high school who, or just know that there's a high school graduate who earned $1 million and there's a PhD at McDonald's, flipping burgers. Sure, but those are outliers. The truth of the matter is that most people with a high school education do not get as high in terms of salary as people with higher levels of education. That's been going on for years and years and years. So because of that, I don't think that just because there's more economic freedom, somebody is going to, or the majority of that population is going to really skyrocket and become the new 1%. They're not going to have the skills or the knowledge to do that, or at least the majority are not. Some might, but that doesn't seem likely. Okay, but still, there's the counterbalance. More economic freedom, meaning the ability to get goods and services and materials. More freedom to the lower levels of the Scholarchy, and more political power to the higher levels of the Scholarchy. So there you go. Ideally, it would also create the philosopher king situation that Plato talked about, where if you achieve a higher level of education to have that power, it is for the good. That you want to have that power because you want to make a difference and do things. So there you go. Now, so ponder that. Feel free to comment. The second thing I want to talk about is, well, actually it's the third thing that I wanted to talk about is the Myers-Briggs. How do the types and the temperaments fit into this? This is, of course, totally conjecture, but thinking about how I've set it up, I want to at least present that and make that part of the discussion. So one of the things people in my personal world have asked about this is that, doesn't this mean it would be NT heavy, meaning the upper echelons of the Scholarchy? Doesn't it mean way up here we'd have a ton of NTs ruling over us? And not necessarily. I think that the NT population percentage as you go up the Scholarchy will be higher than it is in the general population. Okay, so each level you're going to get more and more and more NTs in that population, so, in terms of the percentage. But I think they'll still be a minority, although a much larger minority than they would be as it exists now, and certainly as you go down. I think there would, certainly be a much higher percentage, which means they'd have a much greater say in what's going on. Now, a lot of NTs have come on NF Geeks in comments and said, no, this is bad, equality is really the best way, it's the most rational system, blah, blah, blah. But, this is NF Geeks, and I am an ENFP, and I know my NTs, okay? And I know that in the back of your mind, you believe, all of you believe that, the world would be a lot better if everyone just listened to us. Yes, you do. Okay, you do. I don't think there'd be any NTs that have to be dragged into the Scholar. No, don't give me this power over the system. I don't think that's happening. I don't think you have to be forced into the Scholarchy at all. Okay. Now, certainly there'd be a lot of NFs, I think, on every level, because there's lots of intellectual NFs. I think we would sort of go through all the levels. You see NFs going up and down through it. But certainly they'd be intellectual NF, someone. So, I mean, they'd be up there. But honestly, I think what you'd see is a very large population of SJs. And I think SJs would have the majority on every level. Granted, the population of NTs would be larger as you went up, but the SJ population, I think, would even still be larger simply because there's more SJs than there are NTs and even NFs and maybe even together. So I think you'd get a lot of SJs. I also think you'd get a lot of SJs because SJs are very well educated for the most part, at least the ones that I know, because they're trying to make a real contribution to their families, to the system, to the community. And a lot of SJs have master's degrees. My sister and brother-in-law are SJs. They have master's degrees. There's definitely an intellectual SJ population, and I think they would be present and a majority on every level. Okay, so I think they would have a lot to say. Now that leads us to the SPs, and I think SPs would have a majority on the lower intellectual levels, and this isn't a bad thing, okay? They say this especially to the SPs. And that's because, and this has nothing to do with intelligence, it has to do with SPs seem to have a rebellious spirit against the rigidity of academia and forced learning. And they would rather learn in their own way at their own time, sort of a Montessori sort of version of this. And I think there would be a natural rebellion to doing this. Okay, some would, of course. There's always educated SPs on every level, doctorate, whatever. But I think, again, I don't want to talk about outliers. I think the majority of SPs would be occupying the lower parts, and I think honestly you'd be happier there because that's where the more freedom is in terms of economic freedom too. You would be able to work in the jobs that you want to work at and the careers you want, live the lifestyles you want, and have more economic freedom to do that than you would as you went up. If you went up in the Scholarchy, your economic freedom would be restricted, and therefore your life freedom would be restricted. Therefore, I think you would be much happier occupying that lower level where you have more economic freedom and economic power, okay, to do all the things that you want to do and reap the rewards from that, more than you would if you were up. Because SP is about freedom. That's what SP Spaz says. If you watch SP Spaz, he said that's the most important thing about SPs, and I agree. Okay, the freedom is your watchword, and I think you would find that freedom more, especially with the economics I've suggested, on that level of high school and bachelor's. Okay. Also, finally, I think SPs would be a great barometer to how rigid and totalitarian the system is. SPs need freedom and live for freedom, and I think the more restricted the Scholarchy became, the more rebellious the SPs would become. And I think that could be a barometer to how well the system is working, how flexible the system is, by how the SPs are operating within the entire Scholarchy. So whether the Scholarchy is free or comes crashing down is really on the SPs and how they act and react to the Scholarchy. Not so much the SJs, because the SJs would just be fine in a totalitarian state or an authoritarian state, and they would not in any way be a good sort of compass to whether this is working or not in terms of rigidity and lack of freedom or whatever. But the SPs would, and they would verbalize it, or it would be in their behaviors. Their actions would speak to the rebellion and to what's wrong with the rigidity of the Scholarchy. So therefore, everybody plays a role, no matter where they are in the hierarchy. I think each type has something to give to that. Last, I want to say, would NFs rebel against a rigid Scholarchy? Of course they would, because they would instantly, maybe even the first to let out the call, because we would feel the pain of people suffering at every level of the Scholarchy. But no one listens to us. Ever. So it would fall on deaf ears, and then the Scholarchy, if it became evil and totalitarian, would take us out. That'd be the end of us. So it's really up to the SPs to be the barometer of this, of how free and how much this is functioning in terms of the political and the economic situation. Okay, so there it is. So enjoy, and feel free to comment on this and talk about the new stuff that I've added to it, and tell me what you think of the webcam. What can I do? What should I be doing? Any tech advice you'd like to give would be appreciated. Okay, great. Thanks.